So, Bill, here we go again, and I've got a feeling that this could be spicy.
I like it. Ali Frazier. I think
Well,
it's good.
it is. It's going to be the thriller in Manila, the rumble in the jungle, because we're going to talk about something which came up in our last conversation, and it was slightly fractious at that
Now
point.
it's more controversial than politics and religion. Am I right?
Well, it is because we're going to talk about street photography, and I'm
Yes.
even scared to say the words. Um, I think we might have different takes on this. Who knows? But I want to start with something. Now, here's the thing. I've been involved in photography and so forth for a very, very long time, but I had never heard the phrase street photography until a book came out. And that book was Street Photography Now. It was published by Thames and Hudson, good few years ago now. And are you aware of that book?
No. And when you say a good few years ago, do you mean 25 or do you mean five or what do you?
I knew you'd say that, and I knew my research wouldn't be good enough to have checked when it came out. I
Well,
would say probably about 15,
okay.
about that. It was a big deal at the time, certainly from a UK perspective. And this is the, excuse me, this is the copy which accompanied the book being launched. And for
So
me,
this is like the sales copy?
this was the sales pitch
Okay.
written by the woman who edited the book. Um, and for me, it explains everything that I think is wrong with street photography, although it's a good book.
When you say everything wrong with street photography, do you mean the practice or the term street photography?
Both.
Okay, good.
Okay, it says this. Rub shoulders with high rollers, street vendors and dog walkers, prowl sidewalks and back alleys, encountering comic absurdities, small acts of kindness and scenes of unexpected beauty. Let your eye be caught by a witty billboard, a woman dressed as an angel, a businessman sprinting through the crowd. The human carnival is in town and the streets are alive.
Yeah.
That for me is every cliche of street photography in one encapsulation.
So I think it's a wonderful quote to start with. And one of the reasons why and we could Google this if I had one extra hand, we could Google when this came out.
I'm going
I
to
agree.
actually go to my library that's just next to my desk and I'm going to tell you.
Okay, and
But
I
you
will
can
keep
keep
talking.
talking and in the
I
meantime.
will, no problem. I will keep talking. So it is every cliche imaginable, and I would say it's not necessarily a poorly written, poorly encapsulated cliche, but some things don't become cliche until years later. So, like, if you're listening to Bob Hope's comedy routine, it's not funny now because over the last 70 years, people have done Bob Hope style takes, and it feels redundant. But at the time when it was coming out, it was hysterical and considered enlightening and spot on. Do you see where I'm going? So
I,
it really does matter when that was written to me.
and you know, I've got the book here in my hands. First
Have
of
you heard of have you heard of Google?
I have heard of Google.
Okay.
However, I find it easy. Okay, 2010. There you go. I said
And
15 years ago. I wasn't too far off, was I?
no, you weren't.
2010.
Um, so okay, so that's everything that's wrong with it. So a book has written a cliche. That's certainly the first time a book trying to sell something has ever used cliche.
Hang
Uh,
on, I sense a note of cynicism there.
well, I mean, I don't know who this book was written for, but I do think that as sales copy, which is what that was purporting to do. They did leave out the word ballet on the street or the phrase ballet on the street. I didn't write it down, but I don't remember the word theater. Um,
No,
but
but you know, this
no,
is
but no, no, no. But to your point, I do agree. with the exception of mentioning a red umbrella, they completely encapsulated the cliche that we think of when we think of street photography.
Exactly. But
Why
also,
is that so bad?
well, it's not bad. If people want to go and do that, that's absolutely fine. I think that the problem is with it is that, as I said, until I saw this book in 2010, I wasn't aware of street photography, despite the fact by that time I'd spent 25 years working with photography.
Look, I don't blame you for being out of the loop on stuff, Grant.
What yeah, thanks. Well, I set myself up for that, didn't I?
A
But
little bit.
But I think what I'm really saying here is that to me, that book was a bit of an epiphany. And I think it was for a lot of people that it brought this idea of street photography into a bigger consciousness. Now, whether or not it was brought out as a reaction to kind of Flickr at the time and work being shown there and so forth. I don't know. But there's some really, really good photographers in that book, and it's a really good book. But it seems to me as if what street photography, as people describe it as, is it's kind of set these rules for itself, and it's kind of it has to be this and it has to be this and it has to be shot, and then they get obsessed with the kind of camera it's shot on, and you can't do it on a Leica because it's got to be done on a Fuji because Leica's just for show offs, and it's got all of this kind of real what I see as negative energy around it, which in itself kind of makes it for me repetitive.
Can we back up one step? I am so ready for this conversation. I think it's fantastic. Why did you want to do this episode? I mean, this comes sort of on the tail end of us talking about landscape photography and urban landscape photography and trying to figure out what to call those sub-disciplines and what they are. And then last month we sort of got into the difference between quote unquote street photography and urban environmental photography, urban landscape photography. And I gather you got a lot of comments from listeners.
Yeah, I
Um,
did.
so is that why we're here today talking about
No, I think we're here today because my understanding is the listeners like it when we disagree.
oh, okay, great.
And I felt as if in that discussion around urban environment, we kind of opened a few doors that we didn't travel through. And
Okay.
I thought, well, there's definitely something to be discussed here because you and I are coming at it from different perspectives. There's a massive interest in street photography, um, but I don't often hear it dissected or kind of thrown around the room a little bit to
Okay.
sort of see what it is. If you go on YouTube, it's full of street photographers making street photography films and so forth, which is great. But again, I've looked at a lot of them, so you don't have to, and I do find them very repetitive. So I suppose, in a sense, like any area of photography, I'm always looking for it to move forward.
Well, I guess maybe I'll start by saying what I like about doing street photography. And
Okay.
as listeners know, I'm not a photographer. I'm somebody who loves pictures, spends a ton of time with pictures, helps photographers, edited Life magazine, so worked with some fantastic photographers, but I consider myself someone who takes pictures and not someone who is a photographer. I love going into the streets of New York and taking pictures on the street, which could be called street photography by some.
In the home of street photography.
In the home of street photography, I love it because of that description you just read, because do you do not know what is coming at you. You are forced to react quickly. You are looking for these small moments that say something larger, hopefully, that make a comment about something. It's happening so fast. It's such a challenge um, to try to get something in the frame as it's happening, and so you won't get popped in the face by the big guy who you're shooting.
Oh
And
yeah, or it's like
it's
conflict
very
photography.
dynamic.
It's like conflict photography, but you're not going to get shot.
Well, in America, you don't know that,
No.
but yes, ideally, you're not going to get shot, you're not going to get beat up, but it's happening. It's like sports photography. It can be because somebody's dropping their oranges. and trying to catch them. It is like sports photography in that people are doing sometimes wild poses. It's like combat photography, as you said. It can be like fashion photography. It can be like portraiture. So it has all these elements in it, and it's taking place, at least if you're in New York, at double speed.
So yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on a lot of those things. And you and I both know that there are some great proponents of that work. Sylvia Plath's Unguided Journey was work of genius from my perspective.
Yeah,
If you look at Bill Cunningham's fashion work, again, it's a body of work unlike any other work that was being done at the time. So there are photographers, and we can name many more, and I'm sure you've spoken to some as well, who kind of encapsulate that. I think that the
So
issue,
why do you so why do you want to take my joy away?
because that's my job.
Okay, right.
That's my purpose in life, Bill. That's why I've been sent here. I don't want to take your joy away from it. I just want to. I think as we've discussed many many times over these episodes of the conversation, we neither of us like labels, and we don't like labeling things. We also don't like that idea of photography not moving forward and kind of trying new things and different visual languages and so forth.
I'm
And
nodding, yes.
yeah, and I think that in a certain, whereas perhaps once the majority of, shall we say, hobbyist photography, and I have no problem with the word hobby, as I've had to say many times over the years, hobbies are great, and quite often I find hobbyists take things more serious than professionals do in different ways.
I like to use the word enthusiast.
Okay, enthusiasm.
I think there is something slightly patronizing about the word hobbyist,
Okay,
um,
I,
but semantics,
let's go with enthusiast because I don't mean it in any way condescending.
right?
But I think that a lot of the enthusiast photographers have moved towards street photography away from, shall we say, the landscape and the birds that they once used to do, and that street photography has been brought into that. And I think that means that we should sort of explore that and perhaps challenge some of those cliches and perceptions to say, look, please move it forward. There's a great Dutch photographer, Julie Hedrova, who's brilliant, and she does great YouTube street stuff, and her work's got something different about it. It's got something unique.
Oh, but you're going too fast for my small brain. So is the problem for you um, that more people are feeling like they have to do street photography now, that they're drawn to it, and it's like they're all flooding into this one stadium when there's so much other things to photograph,
They're
or
not
is the
bringing
fact that that's happening creating a sameness in the field?
Yeah, exactly. And I actually saw a friend of the podcast, Harry Benson, just did an interview with Joel Mervitz, which I really recommend on his YouTube channel. And Joel said the same because Harry raised the same issue. And Joel was like, yeah,
Wait, the Harry Benson?
oh, Harry Benson. What am I talking about? Harry Borden.
Oh, okay,
Um,
okay.
I've got Harry Benson on the brain, having read I'm reading the Graydon Carter book at the minute.
Oh, yeah, as am I. And I've had some long lunches with Harry Benson, which I won't bore the listeners with, but
No, but we can take that to the green room because
okay.
so have I. I used to commission Harry quite a lot through what's his wife?
Gigi.
Gigi. That's it. Through Gigi, who basically anyway, we go off subject. So yeah, no, my feeling is that I'm kind of bored. Let's put it out there. I'm kind of bored with 90% of the street photography I see. I
Okay.
think that's really where I am.
Okay. So let's talk about that because I think that's really interesting. Um I guess the thing I'm less interested in talking about, which is where I thought we were going to go, and I even hesitate to bring it up because I do want to come back to what you were just saying, is the term street photography. I thought you were going to get sort of in my face about why do we
Well,
even bother calling it street
yeah,
photography?
I've got a problem with that as well.
Okay.
But
Maybe we'll talk about that a little later, or do you want to talk about it now? It's up to
well,
you.
no, I mean, yeah, let's talk about it now because I think that it's part of the. I think the two things are connected. I'll give you a personal story. When I was an art director 26 years ago, I wanted to be a photographer, and I thought, right, how do I get a portfolio of photography together to go out into the world and get commissioned? So I went to Bologna. I got a Vespa, and I rode it from Bologna to Naples. And all the way along the way, if I saw somebody who I thought was interesting, I'd jump off the Vespa and I did a series of portraits. I got involved in a riot in Rome and I did these pictures on the way. And then I came back, got them all printed up, and that became my first portfolio. Now, in essence, what I was creating was photographs on the street. However, the work did not conform because it was on a Hasselblad and it was black and white and so forth. It did not conform to that little description I gave at the beginning. So therefore, it cannot be labeled as street photography. Or can it?
Well, having not seen the pictures, it's hard for me to say, but I
Think
think
about the
that
process of it, though. Not just the pictures, but the process.
um, again, like if you're driving cross country and stopping here and there to take a picture of a sign or a man who's hitchhiking, that doesn't feel like street photography to me.
Okay.
Um,
So what does
and
street photography have to be to
well,
fulfill the criteria?
I don't want to play that game where you set up false constraints and I have to tell you what it is. Um, you started with a body of work that I can't see, so it's hard for me to comment on it. But
Okay, well, let's choose a body of
well,
work.
let's maybe think about this. Um,
Is
you
Robert
know,
Frank's The American Street Photography?
um, I think much of it is, but I don't necessarily think um, all of it is.
Okay.
Um,
What about William Klein's New York?
um, I mean, when you're looking at a book that's 300 pages and I say yes to it, that there will certainly be pictures in the book that defy expectation. And so that defy that definition. And so I am wary of saying this entire body of work is this thing or that thing. But I do believe that quote unquote street photography can take place in a zoo. Um,
Gary
people
Winograd.
people walking around a zoo. I believe it can take place in a sports arena, not necessarily of the sport, but of the fans. I feel that that could be considered street photography. I mean, like to me, probably the loosest, most basic definition, the thing that I think of is the sort of popcorn machine of human life, where people are bouncing off each other the way popcorn does when it's popping, and the micro movements and spaces in between them and the weird juxtapositions that happen in the middle of this popcorn machine is what makes street photography.
I love the metaphor of the popcorn machine, but I'm going to challenge you once more. So, is that because up until this book coming out, to me, until 2010, to me, that was documentary photography. And to me, that still is documentary photography.
But why can't something exist within a larger shell? I mean, because then if you're
Oh,
talking to
it
me
can.
about I mean, I sort of know where this is going, and quite frankly, I find it annoying because what I think we're going to end up saying is, oh, street photography is part of documentary photography, but why are we even calling it documentary photography? Why can't we just call it photography,
No,
right?
no, I'm not going there. No, I'm
Oh,
not going
thank
there.
God.
Oh, no, no, no,
Um,
Bill. We know each other better than to travel that road.
here's the thing. I believe that most people in the photo world today have a pretty general idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about street photography. So I could call this animal over there that has long ears and a tail. Um, I could call it a beast. I could call it something that looks like a horse. I could call it um, a donkey with black and white stripes. Or I could call it the thing that we all know what its name is, which is a zebra.
Okay.
Um,
So so why am I bored with this photography that can be easily defined through a series of understandings as to what it needs to require?
well, you're asking me why you're bored?
Yeah.
Well,
Or
uh,
why are you bored?
yeah, yes, I'm bored. Well, can I talk about why I'm bored and you
Yeah.
talk about why you're bored?
Okay. How unconventional.
Yes. I'm bored because it all, with some exceptions, and I can mention a few of them. I'm bored because it all looks the same.
Yeah.
Because people are holding red umbrellas, because people are walking in and out of deep cut shadows. I'm bored because I am seeing um, well executed examples of the same damn thing all the time.
Which is exactly why I started with that kind of piece of text at the beginning, because I think 15 years ago it was perfectly valid. I
Oh,
think
great. Okay, yeah.
15 years, what I'm saying is 15 years later, people have used that as like a manifesto.
A prescription.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
a prescription. So,
Which then
so
defines a prescription, which defines a genre. And therefore, I have a problem with the title because it's fulfilling the requirements of that prescription. It's not breaking out of that.
yeah, I'm not sure that's the title's fault, but I do think it is the fault of a couple things. A certain lack of creativity, some new um, barriers or creative barriers or boundaries need to be broken to change what quote unquote street photography can do. Um, but I also think this is a product of Instagram showing us essentially the same image again and again. And this one has 10,000 likes and this one has 9,000 likes. And so if I want to get those likes, if I want people to think my pictures are quote unquote good, then I had better get a red umbrella at golden hour and walk through a deep shadow.
So actually, what we're talking about maybe is one of the problems with street photography is it's a bit like candy floss. It's kind of seems like a good idea, but lacks any kind of nutritional value because it's just the one shot. Whereas actually, most of the work from a documentary perspective builds around a narrative.
Okay, so I think that's fantastic. And I was talking about why I like street photography personally when I take pictures, and part of it is because um, it's low stakes, it's easy. Literally, you can walk away at a moment.
But it isn't. That's the problem, isn't it?
Well, no, at my level it is. Because, and I'll tell you this, I don't have to earn anybody's trust,
Okay.
right? There is no investment. Uh, I can show up on the corner with a camera and walk away 2 seconds later.
There's no personal interaction, is there?
There's no personal interaction. In fact, you're trying to sometimes be sly and not be seen uh, taking, quote, stealing a picture, stealing a moment. And so things happen very fast. The canvas changes very fast. If you miss this one, there's another one walking down the street. 2 seconds, you can try it again. And so to me, it almost has like a video game um, aspect to it where you can miss 10 times in a minute, but the guy walking around the corner with a bucket of fruit on his head, holy shit, that's my guy. So to me, it's this end in New York City, endless, ever cycling uh, theatrical stage just rolling by you, and it's easy, and the stakes are low,
In New York or in London.
and done at a certain level, which is my level, which is not the level of Joseph Michael Lopez, who did a fantastic book of street photography in New York, and plenty of other people who break the rules.
Yeah. Okay. That's more than enough of us disagreeing. Have you been speaking to anybody?
Indeed, I have.
Who?
I will tell you. Let's see. I asked a couple of quick questions to people. Um, the first person I spoke with was Jennifer Schlesinger, who owns and runs the fantastic Obscura Gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico, not far from where I live, where she has exhibited Danny Lyons and Kurt Marcus, Roger Deakins, and on and on and on. She's a great supporter of photography. So I asked her, "What do you think street photography is?" And we go back and forth here a little bit. She said, "When I think of street photography, I think of quintessential photographers like Henri Cartier-Bresson, Elliot Erwitt, Bill Cunningham, and Vivian Mayer, meaning artists who capture life in the city, streets, urban locale without much planning, without setup or intention, except to capture what they see in the fraction of a moment they are seeing it. It's hard to do, and of course, like any photographic genre, the way one chooses to frame a subject will always make it a subjective capture, deciding what the frame will exclude and include in a millisecond."
Absolutely. Yeah. Good. We're all good there.
Yep.
Yeah.
I went on to ask her, "Is street photography the right name for it?" "Probably not," she says. "There are
Hey.
this is why I read it first, Grant. I wanted to, give you a little something.
You're here to please.
I'm here to please, you know that. Probably not. There are other examples of this type of photography that don't involve city, street, urban locale. For example, I think one of the artists I represent at the Obscura Gallery, Nikki Boone, and that's Nikiboon, who's quite good, who has been photographing her family on a farm in New Zealand in a very capture of the millisecond moment type of way. People sometimes liken her work to Sally Mann, but I think of Nikki as more of a millisecond type of photographer, someone who is capturing motion and time in a fraction of a second. So I followed up with that because I thought that sort of uh, sub definition of it happening in a millisecond was interesting. So I asked her,
Isn't that all photography?
well, hang on there, pal.
Okay.
Um,
Sorry.
I asked her how this focus on the millisecond would that differ from, say, sports photography? Um, and she said, "Okay, you have a good point. Sports photography has a clear intention to report the facts in the plays, like photojournalism, I suppose. When I think of street photography, it's reporting facts, but with much less reliance on facts and more perhaps a subjective narrative storyline. We may not assume what you are seeing as a report as much as a take on a moment."
Mm.
Um, I went one level more with her, and the other people I spoke with are shorter than this. And so I was geeking out a little bit on her answer, which I thought Jennifer's answer was great. So I asked her one more question. The charming Cartier-Bresson photograph of the young boy carrying bottles of wine. Is that street photography? Is that a portrait? What's your thinking? And of course, I asked that because last month you and I tangled about whether that was street photography or a portrait. And parenthetically, I had misremembered the photo as a kid holding a baguette. And a viewer,
A
commented
listener.
that it was wine. And so good point.
Yeah, and that
Anyway,
was great. Great feedback there from one of our listeners.
yes. Um, and Jennifer answered, "Yes, that Bresson photo is my dad's all-time favorite. I know it well. I would call it street photography that serves as a portrait." I mean, these concepts run into each other, blending and morphing. Humans like to compartmentalize everything. It helps us to categorize, but it is not always accurate or perfect.
Well, I cannot disagree with a word she said, and she said everything I wanted to say much more eloquently.
She's wise, and that is always why I pop into the Obscura Gallery when I am in Santa Fe.
And any fan of Kurt Marcus, I'm a fan of, so that's good.
Yeah. Um, I spoke with Alex Harris, whose name has appeared here before, and I spoke with Alex for the landscape episode because of his maybe non-traditional landscapes, and I found his comments there so insightful. I turned to him again. Alex is the former professor of documentary photography at Duke University, and he's published nearly 20 books, including the fantastic Red, White, Blue, and God Bless You. So I asked Alex, "What do you think street photography is, and is street photography the right name for it?" He responded, "My idea of street photography comes from Walker Evans, who I got to know as an undergraduate and who, in an interview, ironically published in Art in America, in 1971, said this." And now he's quoting Walker. When you were young, you were open to influences and you go to them. You go to museums. Then the street becomes your museum. The museum itself is bad for you. You don't want your work to spring from art. You want it to spring to commence from life. That's in the street now. And Alex goes on to say, in my own work, that's the way I've thought about street photography, with the street as a metaphor for life. And I found that early life in the rural South, in New Mexico, and in Alaska, where I was lucky to immerse myself in the lives of families and communities and was able to develop an approach to photography that works for me. Um, what I like about the quote that Alex pulled was the fact that the street is the metaphor for life. And, I was talking about it as a stage, but of course, the stage is also a metaphor for life. So Walker Evans just kind of went right to it. And I do think that that is one of the attractive things because in the space of a millisecond, on the street, you can see joy, you can see family interaction, you can see tears, theft, high drama, low drama, the totally mundane that we can all relate to, and the crazy shit that none of us can relate to. And I think that can be thrilling.
I completely agree. Look, Bill, we're reaching a point of agreement on this.
No, no.
We are, because what I think is so interesting about, and it's always so great when you speak to these people, but what I'm sort of hearing from what you're saying is an emotional attachment to that documentation, whether it's on the street or not, in its kind of narrowest sense, a narrow street, or a broader sense of that. What I'm not hearing from you is a kind of calculated, I'm going to make street photography and it is this. What I'm hearing is this kind of really kind of actually, this is, a documentation of life. And that's great.
Yeah. I think it must be noted that I'm speaking to photographers here who are over 30 years old, some significantly more experienced and older. And, I really do think that Instagram has done so many great things for photography, and I am all in on it, and I learn every day from it, and I am able to preach the gospel and bring in new flock members thanks to Instagram. But it also has come to narrow definitions of what things can be and promote cliche. And I think that is something that is very important for photographers, regardless of the discipline, to push up against.
I agree with you. I do get a lot of young photographers coming to me saying, "I love street photography. I want to be a street photographer." I put the question that you've put. I said, "Well, what does that mean? What do you want to do with this?" I don't really know, but they've hooked onto that label.
I mean, the other thing I'll say, and I did speak to a couple more people, and we can pivot back to that. But you know, as you know, I help photographers make their books, and a lot of people come to me and ask me to help them make their books. And a lot of the people who come to me have books of quote unquote street photography. And image by image, there's nothing wrong with them. Some of the images are quite good, but I find myself looking at the body of 70, 80 pictures and saying, so what? So you caught this interesting moment or this funny moment or this sad moment, but what does this all lead to? Like, what is the grand arc or what is the message of of this work? It can no longer be people do the quirkiest things on the street because we know that has been spoken. It whoever it can't be, as much as I hate it, the Bruce Gilden, jump out, giant flash, scare you, and get a strange expression. We've seen that. It's not. It's if it was ever interesting, it's no longer interesting now. So the challenge really is don't just make an interesting picture of the street. Find something in it that stands for something larger.
Well,
Is
you've
is
got Yeah, I mean, but I asked you a little bit earlier, tell me why I'm bored, and you've just told me because that's exactly why I'm bored. And I would say exactly the same thing as you were saying there, which is, what's your personal connection to this? What are you trying to do? What is your hope from this? And you raised the point about getting likes and putting a picture on there and getting likes and whatever. And if that's kind of what you want to do, that's absolutely fine. But that doesn't connect with my understanding of where photography can go, and I don't think it does with
Yeah.
yours either.
I mean, I sort of feel like if likes are the most important thing for you, consciously or not, if it is really helping to direct your photography, take pictures of your cats because you will get a lot of likes on cats. Cats are really cute, or your dog. But this is if you want to progress in your work, um, take a new perspective. I really do think that try to look for something new. I mean, look for a concept, a theme, something that's repeating. It's not street photography per se, and I don't want to argue with you about what it is, but that famous Empire State photo essay that Joel Meyerowitz did years ago, a generation ago, where he went around New York, and somewhere in the frame, he caught a bit of the Empire State Building, or maybe a sign that said the Empire State Building, but it wasn't necessarily the focus. The focus could have been, you know, a woman standing in front of a cafe, and that's what your eyes are drawn to. And then you happen to see way behind her, there's the Empire State Building. That's great conceptual street photography to me.
Exactly. And I think if you really want to understand street photography, you have to listen to what Joel has to say, because especially having just watched the recent film, Two People Trying Not to Kill Each Other, with him and his wife, there are a number of times in there he really gives very eloquent explanations of of street photography. And in a sense, I suppose he's one of the last living pioneers from that period with Arbus and Winogrand and so forth, and Tony Ray Jones and so forth.
Let me tell you about my very brief conversation with Joseph Michael Lopez, who I found his book that came out last year to be kind of pioneering. And, as someone who has lived in New York no longer, but I did for 35 years, and someone who's into photography, I feel like I have seen every possible photo of New York, or every take, or every cliche. And Michael's book, it's brave to do street photography in New York, knowing all that. He published this book of New York State street photography last year called JML NYC 02 to 23. And I think he broke down a lot of the things that you and I expect and get bored by seeing. So he saw things in a new way. So I asked Michael, what do you think street photography is? And he said, when I think street photography, I have an immediate mental image of asphalt and concrete, literally. That being said, the descriptor street photography really doesn't tell us anything about the photographer or their work, which I think is quite true. It summons up a generic that we've been talking about.
Mm.
I asked him, is street photography the right name for it? He says, as it pertains to what I do, I'm a straight photographer, a man with a camera. What I practice is more personal reportage.
I like that.
Yeah, and it's personal reportage that he makes while walking through the streets of New York, but it is not the kind of stuff that you and I think of when we think of street photography per se. It's on
No,
the outer edges of that.
exactly. But also, what's really nice about that is it goes back to that thing I was picking up on the others of that emotional connection that
Right.
it's coming from the self. But also, it's strange, isn't it? I'm not gonna say reportage. I always say reportage, being from being from the UK. But it reportage or reportage is not a word we hear very often nowadays. But
Mm.
it really was a word that back in the day, as the kids say, you would hear all the time as a reference to photography, whereas street photography seems to have kind of is the new way, new thing. Reportage is what we used to say, and actually, it is a reportage of the street.
I wonder if part of the reason that word fell out is because it sounds a little highfalutin. I don't know.
Depends. When you said it, it didn't. Maybe when I say it, it does.
Reportage.
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 There was once a
Um,
fantastic magazine called Reportage, I have to say. It
right.
was brilliant.
I spoke with one more photographer, and I'll read that, and then we can see where we go from there.
Okay.
Um, the photographer I spoke with is Ave Pildis. Ave is about maybe 85. He is a wonderfully talented, ever curious photographer that more people should know about. In the early 70s, he worked at Capitol Records in Los Angeles as a designer, I think. And during his lunch breaks, he would go out into the street and sort of sit down and photograph the things that went by him. His latest book is called Starstruck. It's published with Deadbeat Club Press, and it focuses on Hollywood Boulevard between 72 and 75. And his pictures are people making their way on the street. They're terrific and they're fun. Um, but he's also made these gem-like architectural studies of Hollywood box offices, which are street photographs. They are on the street, but there's no people in them. They're really architectural. So anyway, my question to Ave was, what is street photography? And he told me, street photography isn't always about people. I'd say it's just about life observations, for the most part, unstaged ones. But if you can find an interesting location, you can wait for something good to happen. If you're a city boy, it's easier to fit into this category. I asked him, is street photography the right name? It's a shame, he says, we can't ask the Bruces, Davidson and Gilden, or Henry Cartier-Bresson, or Eugene Auger, or Weegee, or William Klein, or the hundreds of other photographers I've left out. But if you have to have a name, it's probably as good as any.
Well, I have to say, Ave is a friend of the podcast. He's
Yep.
contributed previously, so do if you're listening, go back into the archive and you can hear Ave talking. Um, I'm going to disagree with him on the last bit only.
Oh, the,
I
the, the terminology.
The terminology, yeah, because I think that um, all of those people you've spoken to, and thank you as always to them for contributing. Um, I think they kind of, but I would do, kind of support my argument at the beginning there that none of them spoke about the cliches. And I think that both you and I, when we talked about landscape photography, we kind of agreed that what we didn't like were the cliches in landscape photography,
Yep.
the chocolate box thing.
Right.
And I think that's really what we're talking about with street photography as well. Is that, it's a bit like certain music genres, goth, heavy metal,
Mhm.
grunge. Within those labels, there are pioneers, and then there are those who came after and kind of just did a watered down version.
I mean, I think the challenge for people listening to this who want to push themselves, and if this resonates with them, um, is to try a kind of street photography that isn't necessarily one like they've seen before. And I can't tell you what that prescription is because that's the work, figuring out, what researching what has been done before, and then figuring out how to not do that or how to use a piece of it. Um, and I think you know, that's the hard part. That's the thrilling part. That's the ultimately the part that may not get you a lot of likes, um, certainly at first. But it is how you develop your own personal perspective. And I guess the question is, as a photographer, think about, what do I want to say? Yes, there is this tapestry or popcorn machine or um, ballet on the street. We all know that. But what do you want to say about that? It can't just be that it exists. it has to be to come from an emotional place, ideally to come from you, and tell us why this moment you're seeing is special. What does it represent?
I agree with you. I'm going to add something to that. In the theatre of circumstance, you need to have a focus which is true to your own visual language. And I don't think that, I think that's the case in any area of photography. But
Yeah.
I just think at the moment and over the last few years, and a lot of it, I'm surprised you weren't aware of that Street Photography Now book because it was a bit of a game changer for a lot of people. I mean, it sold out in its first edition, it went into a second edition. And I think it made an awareness of this kind of work. And therefore, it has become very attractive, as you say, to people who don't want the confrontation, who don't want to have to try and make something happen, but are happy to go out and try and observe something happening.
Well, I mean, in many ways, street photography today, what, of the kind that we are talking about,
Mm.
I think is a function. Okay, here's my big theory. The kind of boring street photography, predictable that we're seeing today is a function of a few things. One of them is Instagram. We've talked about that because, what you see a lot of 4 hours a day or more is becomes your vocabulary. So set that aside. The other thing is the technology, is the iPhone. It is so easy for a bumblehead like me to take out a phone. There's nothing easier and take a picture, as opposed to committing to something with a quote unquote real camera and being there and committing. There's something else too, and we alluded to it last time. I've talked about it before. Um, the homogenization of the stage that we're talking about. So we're talking about the street being a stage, except now, well, in the 40s and 50s and the 60s, whoever was setting that stage was hand painting signs. People were hand making their own costumes, their own clothes. Um, you know, you would not see two Starbucks on a block, and certainly if you saw, Joseph's locksmith, Joseph's uncle may have painted that sign, and you would not see that same sign in another city. The fact that's all gone, the fact that there's Chase Bank and Starbucks and gas station X and gas station Y, and they look the same in every city in America, um, has homogenized the stage and the costumes, and it forces the photographer to be even more creative to get something that is more signature than everybody else is shooting the same stuff.
I think that's absolutely spot on. I think I would add to that is that in the past, I'm sure when you were growing up, and well, certainly when I was growing up in South London, life was on the street. Everything happened on the street. Whereas now, the majority of things on the street is people going from one place to another place with a carrier bag, with a shopping bag.
And looking at their phone.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so when people are looking at their phone instead of looking at each other, it takes a little bit of that magic away that used to be on the street that may not appear in a photograph, but it was, in me talking about the popcorn, you know, you could feel people feeling each other on the street, sometimes maybe less than they're
Well,
more than there are today.
hopefully appropriately, but
Yes.
yeah, I agree, and I think if we look back at at the photography on the street, Picture Post, Life magazine, Bernice Abbott, going back to the 1930s, 40s, the New York School, you can go on and on and on. That work is still incredibly relevant today because it gives us a historical perspective. Whereas a lot of the work today, as you say about the shadows and whatever, it's hard concrete, it's modern architecture, it's people maybe sitting down and so forth. So I think we go on. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I do want to say something. Like I don't think it's wrong for people to look at Alex Webb's, the
Yeah,
great photographer Alex Webb. Look at his pictures, see the deep shadows, see how there's things happening in three planes, and trying to copy that because that's how we learn. We see something that we like and we try to mimic it, appropriate, master it, but then you have to move off of it. Um,
exactly, exactly. And when you were saying that, I was thinking of Trent Park in exactly the same way. That
right.
we don't need 2,000 Trent Parks or 2,000 Alex Webbs. You need to bring your own spice to the table.
And I think the difference between now and not to sound like an old man, 30 years ago
We
was,
are old men, Bill. That's a
but
that's
you
our
know,
superpower.
I think back then you might practice doing what another photographer did, what another photographer who you like their style, you like their approach, you would practice, practice, practice doing what they did until you got a sense of it. But not everybody would see those pictures.
No,
Uh, Today, everybody sees those pictures and it becomes this sort of self-feeding beast.
I agree with you. It seems to me with the phrase self-feeding beast, that could be an appropriate place in which to finish this particular discussion.
And that sounds fine. That sounds fine.
Now,
Self-feeding
did
beast.
you enjoy that, Bill?
Much more than I thought I would, to be honest.
I think that's the joy of the conversation being going on for this long, is that it sometimes takes us into the choppy waters, but that's always where I think the fun is.
Absolutely. I'm with you.
Listen, it was great as always. Thank you very much to all the people who you spoke to and for their contributions. Really valid, and I love the fact that they agreed with me, obviously. And Bill, where can people follow you on Instagram?
Well, first I want to say that we'll list all those people in the show notes. And it is so great that they agreed with me. You can find me at Bill Shapiro uh, on all the various social media platforms, principally Instagram.
That sounds great. Listen, Bill, as always, it's been a joy and a pleasure, and I look forward to catching up with you again next month.
Likewise, Grant. Thank you.